Here we go. This is what I imagine a lot of you were looking forward to. Slope time. You see this part's a little bit longer than the other ones, which is to be expected. So yeah, I just want to go ahead and say, follow this one very carefully. Pay attention. If you find yourself zoning out or anything like that, you know, if you need to take a mental break, take a mental break, because it'll just be important to pay attention, because we're doing slopes, but we're also doing them in a way where we're also going to include like ceiling slopes and things like that too. We're going to tackle them from every angle we can. I tried my best not to leave anything out. Recording this was pretty eventful. You'll see what I mean as we go on. So anyways, just reiterating, this is where the series starts to get a little bit more advanced. So all you need to do is just take it slow, pay attention, watch your code, make sure you're doing everything the right way, and, you know, make sure you're doing your best to understand everything about it. Pausing the video, going back and listening to different explanations a couple times is always a good thing. So yeah, not trying to psych you out at all. I'm literally, you know, I'm just saying, in these next couple videos, this is where you're going to be learning a lot. Not going to be too tough. The concepts are simple, just a lot to learn. So here we go. Good luck.
All right, slope time. Are you nervous? I'm a little bit nervous. Let's open up our player. There we go. Player, step event. So there's a very simple principle here. Right now, we're just checking immediately forwards for a wall. However, if say, for instance, we want a 45-degree angle slope to be walkable for us, then when we're checking for a wall collision, we need to check forwards and upwards by the same speed, right? That's 45-degree angle. And then we can make our decisions for what to do from there. So, oh man, it's a different day now. Again, this zoomed in view is looking so weird to me. I'm gonna separate all this again. Sorry. But like I said, let's get to adding in that 45-degree sort of check, right? And here's how we'll do that. So first we want to keep this check. Are we going to run into a wall if we move forward with our X speed? And basically what we're going to say is if there is a wall in the way, now we can sort of like scoot up the check first and make sure it isn't just, you know, like a single pixel or again, like a 45-degree angle or less. And otherwise, if it is a more steep angle, then we can do this regular collision code. So at the top here, I'm going to say first check if there is a slope to go up. And like I said, here's what that looks like. If there's not a place meeting, and remember, we're still checking forwards, but we're also going to check upwards with that same X speed that we're moving. That'll give us that 45-degree angle. So if there's not a place meeting where the X plus our X speed and our Y minus the absolute value of our X speed minus 1 with our object wall. Okay, so let me explain that really quick. Like I mentioned, the absolute value of our X speed is just going to be, you know, the positive version of our X speed. So even if we're moving to the left and our X speed is negative, we still want to check upwards. So we're subtracting the absolute value of our Y speed upwards. And the minus 1 is just kind of a little bit of a padding. I've noticed that because remember, we're going to be dealing with precise pixels and things like that. This is a 2D game that works with collisions based on pixels, not vectors, or, you know, this isn't a 3D game with 3D geometry. So a slope in a pixel art game like this is actually like a really tiny little staircase. It's like a bunch of tiny little walls, square walls, all put together on top of each other. As far as Gamemaker is concerned, in the way that we're going to be doing this, it's not going to be viewing these pixels as turned at a 45-degree angle. So what I found is if we're checking for our X speed horizontally, and then we're checking upwards by the same amount of X speed, every now and then it can kind of get caught and get a little hiccup, you know, because again, just the odd shape of what is essentially a very tiny little staircase as opposed to an actual slope upwards. So I found just by adding a pad of just checking one more pixel above, it'll smooth out that collision check, and it won't really change the angle that we're going up. Technically, there may be a case where if the X speed is like positive or negative 1, then maybe you'll accidentally be able to go up a slightly steeper slope every now and then. If that's the case, you could change this to be our, you know, our sub pixel value, but you probably aren't going to be putting too many walls with this slope in your game, right? You may not realized it and you may have never really thought about that before, but it's a pretty uncommon slope in a game, mostly because it doesn't look like you can intuitively go up it, and going down it can kind of feel a little odd or awkward, whether it's snapping down to it really fast or just falling off of it. So look at a bunch of your favorite 2D games and you'll find that this is a very uncommon slope to have in them. And it's just because it's one of those things that's inherently just a little bit less readable than pretty much anything else. Now, you may find a slope like this on a ceiling, which we're actually going to talk about that today. So yeah, but on the ground, it's not generally something you're going to see. So as far as I'm concerned, the benefits of this smoothing out and the stability of it is pretty worth it. And we're trying to make these collisions very precise, and we're trying to make them behave a very specific and very intuitive way. So I think there's a couple more times where we'll need to do something like add a little bit of a pad here or something like that, but I'll talk about each one whenever we get there. But anyways, the point is this collision, or lack thereof one, is confirming for us that there is a slope there, right? There is a wall in front of us. We know that from here. But if we were to go up by the same amount of x speed we're moving horizontally, basically, if there's not a collision there, then that basically means that there is a slope and it is either 45 degrees or less. So what do we do if there is a slope? Well, we can use the same logic here. We can use a while loop and just move our y coordinate up to where the top of that slope should be, right? So let's look at this. While there is a place meeting, so while there is a collision of where we're trying to get with our x speed and our y with an object wall, which we know that there is because we're right here. While that's true, we can go up with our y instead of going in, again, same principle as this down here. So up with our y by our sub-pixel amount, which again, the reason we're doing a sub-pixel here, like half a pixel, is because it just keeps everything very tight, keeps all the pixels very close together. And as I mentioned before, you may notice some things about it that seem a little bit weird, but promise you, it all makes sense, all right? Trust me, trust in me. So what's happening here? We're running into a wall where we want to go, right? If we were to move our x speed forward, we'd be running into a wall. But if in that position that we were to move to, if we were to also go up by our x speed, there's not a wall in the way, right? Then in any scenario where this is true and this is true, it basically means that we can just go ahead and scoot our y up to where we would no longer be running into the wall, because then once we get down here, our x speed is going to carry us over. And so we know that in this position with our y moved up and where our x speed is going to be, there isn't a wall in the way. And if there is a slope to go up and we've decided to go up it, then that basically just means this piece of the code isn't necessary because we're not running into a flat wall anymore. So we can just add this here. We can say else and then put brackets around our precise check and setting our x speed to 0. And then we can just add this comment here. If there is no slope, regular collision. So let's check this out. I'm going to make 4 slope sprites really quick. I'm just going to right click, duplicate my wall sprite, call this slope 0. Then I'm basically just going to cut out a part of it like this. Look at that, slope 0. Then I'm going to go to my collision mask and I'm going to set it to be precise. You can set it to automatic or whatever you want, but the point is now only the filled in pixels will be part of the collision. This part is totally empty right here. It's kind of hard to tell because we're doing grayscale, but here just to help out, I'll show you. I'll change these to like a green color. Yeah, so you can see it's just filling in that part. This part right here isn't getting any darker. So change these back. Okay, so I'm gonna make 4 separate sprites for each slope angle. Okay, so I got slope 0, 1, 2, 3. They all have precise collisions on because I'm going to make 4 slope objects, but they're all literally just walls. Okay, so right click, create, call this object slope, set it to be my slope sprite, and set its parent to be my object wall. That's very important. And I can right click, create another one, object, oslope. I'll call this oslope1 because my slope 1. If you want to, you can set the parent to be your object slope. If for some reason you think that you might want to reference slope objects, slope walls specifically at some point in the future. The point is it doesn't matter because the way we're doing this code is it's just checking for walls. We're not actually checking for slope objects. These are just, the reason we're making these separately is 1, because we need the separate objects, but 2, because it just makes creating our levels much easier to have 4 separate slope objects that are just already the correct angle that we want them to be at. So again, either O wall, O slope. I might as well just set them to O slope. So you might as well too if you want to. Again, maybe you want to reference slope objects for some very specific reason at some point. Either way, they're just functioning as walls because the slope is a child of a wall anyway. So I'm gonna make 2 more. Okay, and I'm gonna move them up under my wall because these are all part of the same family here. Okay, again, they're just walls with precise collisions turned on, and just having one for each angle already makes putting things down a level much easier. So yeah, I got my grid setting up to 16 by 16 here, and let's just put in a couple slopes. And yeah, these are precise, so I can even stretch them. Whoops. Okay, well, there's something I don't want for these slope objects that I forgot because I copy and pasted my wall object, which was silly. I'm gonna go to 9 slice, and I'm gonna turn that off because I want these to actually deform. Or I don't want them to do this, right? I want them to deform. So 9 slice turned off on all of these. There we go. You might need to close out of your room and restart it. So now, okay, yeah, now we're just stretchy. So here's a couple more angles. And then here's that tall angle that I said that you probably never really realized that doesn't show up in video games almost ever. So yeah, all right, let's test walking up this. And I'm also just gonna do one over here. There we go, something like that. Okay, let's test. Oh yeah, that's what we should see. And so yeah, you see here, can't go up this angle, but we can go up all these others. And now going down looks weird, and we're gonna talk about that next. But yep, we're going up all the slopes, totally fine. We can jump off the slopes. Everything's working cool. Great. Awesome, man. Very cool. Thanks for sharing. Yep, you're welcome. Sorry, what's going on with me today, man? I feel weird. Right, so next most important thing, going down slopes. Let's do it. If your slopes were acting weird, by the way, 1, make sure your code is correct, but 2, first, make sure your sprites are all set to precise collisions and make sure their 9 slices turned off, all that stuff. Make sure every one of your slope objects here is a child of the object wall, or at least O slope is a child of the object wall, and then these 3 are children of specifically O slope. Either one is fine, but just make sure that that's all working and then check your code again. Otherwise, we're now ready to do going down slopes. And we're actually going to do that outside of the collisions here, because going down a slope, we're not actually colliding anything. What's happening is we're walking off of the little ledges in the slopes as if we're walking off a ledge. So let's go before the movement code and let's go after the collision code. And we're going to say go down slopes. And it's kind of going to be the opposite. So first we can check if our Y speed is greater than or equal to 0, right? So if we're not moving upwards, if we're not jumping, we don't want to snap down to a slope if we're supposed to be moving upwards. So that's number 1. But now let's check ahead where we're going, and we can check under our feet to see if there isn't a wall where we want to be, right? So if not, place meeting. So if there is not a wall where we are trying to get with our X speed, so X plus our X speed, and it's not directly below us, so Y plus 1 with object wall, that means where we're stepping, there is no wall below us. Then we can add one more check and say, and there is a place meeting of our X plus our X speed. And this is just going to be the exact opposite of this right here, right? Instead of checking upwards for space, we're checking downwards for a wall. So, oh, this big text, you go away for now. So that'll be our checking downwards. So our Y plus, again, the absolute value of our X speed. We'll add a little pad again, like we did up here. We'll add one more pixel to pad down for the same reason I said, just kind of smoothing things out with a wall. So if we're not jumping upwards, there's not a wall where we're trying to stand, but there is a wall essentially downwards at a 45-degree angle or less, then heck, let's just basically do the same thing, right? Let's say while there isn't a place meeting of our X plus our X speed and our Y plus our subpixel with an object wall, then let's just move our Y coordinate down until there is a wall directly below us, basically, right? So if we're hovering in a space where there is a slope downwards at a 45-degree angle relative to how fast we're going, then let's just go right down to the wall. It's the exact opposite of this up here. And also while we're here, just to make this look a little bit cleaner and keep that in line with what we just did, I'm gonna move all this onto one line like that. That was just bothering me, sorry. But yeah, so going down slopes is again, just doing the exact opposite of what we did for going upward slopes. So let's test again. Up's good and down is good, look at that. And we can jump while going downwards, which we didn't really test before, but you may have tried, but you couldn't because basically what was happening is you were continuously walking off of a ledge. So yeah, it's basically just, we never get off the ground this way. And we've got this steeper slope here. Yep, see, we fall off of that because it's too steep of an angle. We don't want to go like down there. I made the sound. You imagined what happened, I'm sure. So yeah, looking pretty good. Pretty happy about this. So yeah, that's it for slopes. Just kidding. Gotcha. There's more. Think about it. What about this? Huh? Get out of here. Think about this. Come back. Here we go. What here? What happens if we jump into this, right? Let's watch. If I jump into this, wow, that sucks. I'm just getting hung up and stuck on this corner. So there's another example of slopes that we don't like to not be working. So we also want to be able to get pushed down on slopes like this. Now, if you had a more, hopefully I went back and added this in because I think I forgot to say that there's an optional way to do this. But, in like a Mario game, Mario bonks off the top of top stuff. You can't like, if I were to do this, see how long my player stays and I could get out of the way and my player is still going up. So my Y speed isn't terminated by running into a block up here, or, my jumping speed isn't. I probably showed you a way where we can very easily do that. In fact, since I haven't actually put it in this project yet, I can show you right here. So right here where, no, down in the Y collision. So right here, yeah, this sucks. I don't know why I just crunched everything up last time. What is wrong with me? So before setting our Y speed to 0, I mentioned this. This is sort of a bonk. If my Y speed was less than 0, which means I was going upwards, then jump hold timer equals 0, right? That'll exit our jump. It'll basically be like releasing the jump button. That is not going to be as noticeable with this. See? Like, yeah, I get caught up for about a frame, but the thing is because the player starts falling back down immediately, they can just fall forwards down this thing because our Y speed is moving downwards anyways because of gravity. And so this is kind of a different priority thing. In a Mario-y type game, maybe we probably wouldn't want to add this because you'd want probably anytime you hit your head on something, even if it's a slope, you might want to have like a bonk sound effect or whatever. Like you might want it to be treated the same way, and it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But I still think getting caught up and having your speed stop for that one frame feels pretty weird. And once we were to add in momentum or something like that, it would probably feel pretty weird too. So regardless of what kind of platform you're trying to make, let's add this slope collision. It's easy, I promise. It's just as easy as the one we just did because it's the same exact principle yet again. So back up to X collisions here. So we're checking for a slope to go up, and then if there isn't one, we just do a normal collision. But now we have one more to check for. We're gonna look for the possibility of ceiling slopes, so downward ceiling slopes. So we're basically gonna be doing the same thing we did last time, where now we're gonna check for ceiling slopes, and we'll say, I'm gonna change this comment to say next, check for ceiling slopes, and then I'll say otherwise do a regular collision. So ceiling slopes right here, basically gonna be the same thing, except instead of checking upwards for the slope, we're checking downwards. So again, we're still in this larger check right here of we know that there's a wall in our way. And now that we've determined that we shouldn't be going up a slope, that there isn't space to do that. Now let's check if we're gonna go down. So if not, place meeting our X plus our X speed. Again, now we're checking down, so it's just the opposite. So Y plus the absolute value of our X speed plus 1 with that little pad with an object wall. So this is basically checking downwards at a 45-degree angle. Then we can say while place meeting our X plus our X speed and our current Y position with a wall, then we can just push our Y coordinate down by our sub-pixel amount. Once again, very similar to this, just the opposite. No copy and pasting here because the little differences are obviously incredibly important. But yeah, again, there's a wall in our way. We've checked upwards by our X speed to see if we could move up. Ergo, there is a slope going upwards this way, or this way if we're going, the opposite direction. And if that's not the case, then we move our Y coordinate down by our X speed to see if there is a slope that can push us downward. And if there is, we push us downwards. And then finally, if that isn't true, then we do the normal collision. So that's ceiling slopes, and that's finally the normal X collision. So we can test our game again. And just to test to make sure it's working, if you did include this little bonk code right here, and you do want to include it, for now I would disable it, so just comment it out in some way or something like that, because it'll be clear if we got it right, if we can hold the jump button and keep the jumping speed persistent. So like this, where we don't bonk. So ready? Oh, look at that. Sliding right down it. And our speed never hiccups or anything like that. It's just working perfectly. Our going up and down slopes are working perfectly. Great. Okay, that's great. And once again, this is a 45-degree collision. So if we were to do like this and have a higher angle like that, which these would be much more common to see in a game. This kind of angle, not this one or this one or this one. Not really those, but you can see pretty much any angle going downwards like this because it just makes a little bit more sense that what'll happen if you run into that in a platformer type game. So it's this. We get caught on it, And again, this is me holding the jump button because this is kind of acting more like a regular wall. If you want the player to slide down this slope, if you still think that this is, if you think that feels weird, then, think about it. What would be the way to increase this downwards slope angle, right? Well, if you wanted to increase that downward slope angle, basically doubling it, right? Then all you need to do is go in your checking for ceiling slopes. And instead of checking for an equal amount of your X speed, you can check double your X speed right here, right? Because now if, for instance, my movement speed is 2 horizontally, what happens is it's like I'm checking to the left 2 and down 2. However, instead of doing that, you could check to the left 2, which is your X speed, but then 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that's a lot of room, which means like there's a collision here. 1, 2, but 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, no longer a collision anymore. So pretty simple stuff, but now we should be able to slide down those if we want to as well. That to me feels a little strange and a little fast. Again, like I said, these kind of angles are more common in games, but even then, you might find more steep angles that are more obvious or something like that. But again, that's totally up to you. Totally up to you how you want to do that. See, like that feels a little odd to me. I mean, that's just part of how the jumping code works, but something about how fast we're pushed down doesn't really feel like a feel thing. Anyways, but that's just totally up to you. I am going to keep it as the 45-degree angle because I like that. And once again, if you were to have the bonk code in right here, then none of this is going to feel weird because even if you bonk on that, it just catches you up for a second, but that kind of feels like it makes a little bit more sense to me. But your speed is not hiccuped by going into the 45-degree one, right? So yeah, again, up to you. But that leaves one more thing. Just one more thing. What could it be? This is a more steep angle. Now I wonder, does this feel weird? Does it feel weird that I bonk at that angle going this way? Or should it maybe like slide me up in this direction? And I think this is probably the most, I'm gonna take out the bonk code again. I don't want to use it right now. I'm gonna say bonk, this is optional. So we've done all my X collision stuff with the slopes, but yeah, do we want to slide up those very, very steep slopes, right? Like imagine if there's a slope like this steep, right? Just for the sake of testing in a second, I'm just gonna scoot some things around here. There we go. So yeah, jumping up into something like this, like do I want that to stop my jump, or do I want it to kind of nudge me back over this way a little bit? And again, this is going to be dependent on one, how you expect your levels to look. You know, are you really going to be using angles like this and stuff like that? And two, what kind of game you're making. But since we're here, I'm going to show you how to do it anyways. Again, it's the same exact principle. However, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be moving upwards into this, and then we're going to want to move ourselves out left or right horizontally. So instead of doing this in our X collision, we're going to be doing this in our Y collision. But again, it's the same idea. It's going to be a little bit more code though, even though it's the same idea, but you'll see why. Y collision. So first, basically what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this section right here, and this is essentially just going to be if we're moving downwards, right? We don't ever want to slide down slopes in this direction. We don't ever want to fall down and go like that. We only want to do this while going upwards. So we can keep our regular collision code stuff here, and we can just put this in a big check like this. If Y speed is greater than or equal to 0, then we'll do this code. And here's all the code that needs to be included in that. It's the normal collision that we have here and setting us on the ground, which now we don't need this anymore because we're already checking up here. So we can just get rid of this check because we only want to set ourselves on the ground whenever we're moving downwards, obviously. And I can change this to be our downwards Y collision. And so now I can add a space called upwards Y collision and just specify to myself with ceiling slopes. And that will be if our Y speed is less than 0, right? So good. In addition to that, just like with all the other slope checks, we know that the only time we want to actually run those checks is if there is a wall in our way in the first place, right? Just like we did with all the X stuff, just like right here. So I can also add, and there is a place meeting at our X coordinate and our Y coordinate plus our Y speed for a wall. And here's where we need to get a little bit choosy, a little bit decisive with how we want this to function, because this is just going to be a little bit more, the scenarios here are a little bit more complicated, right? So, hello, nice to meet you. Right, we no longer have upwards collisions. So, okay, but it doesn't matter. My point is, this is kind of funny. I like that. It's a good mechanic. But basically the point is, do we want to be pushed up like this? Like, do we want to do that if we're trying to move left in this scenario? If I jump up into it like that, like at this direction, do I still want my player to be forced to go like, or not? I don't think so. What I think makes the most sense is if I'm just standing still and I want to jump up into these slopes, then they'll push me up. But if I'm trying to move left, I don't want them to push me up. I want that to turn into a normal Y collision for me. So, you know, obviously same goes for the other direction. So here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to say jump into sloped ceilings. And so we're going to kind of, we're going to divide this into two separate things. Again, this is what we want the slopes to do is mostly based on intent. So what inputs am I pressing? So let's go with this. I'm just going to say this is the slide up left slope, right? So I'm gonna close these. They don't need to be open. Okay, so I'm gonna say that's these slopes, right? Where if I jump into them, I should slide up left. So remember, I don't want to do that if I'm trying to move to the right. And we have our movedir variable, right? So I can say if my movedir is not equal to +1, right? So that basically means if I'm not trying to move, or if I am trying to move to the left, then let the slide happen. But if I'm trying just make sure I'm not trying to move to the right. Like say that first. And so I can say if I'm not trying to move to the right, and same principle as the other thing, except remember before we would add the absolute value of our X speed to our Y coordinate, we're just going to do the opposite here, where we're trying to move if we can be pushed left or right. It's specifically in this case, we're checking if we can be pushed left. So let's say, oh, I'm sorry. And this is a not place meeting, right? We're checking for space if we can be pushed over. So if there's not a place meeting of our X coordinate minus the absolute value of our Y speed, again, -1, we're going to push that check just one more pixel over just to smooth it out. And that's checking where our Y speed is going to take us with a wall. So if we're not trying to move to the right, and whenever we go up to a ceiling and there is space to the left of us, which again, this will be a 45-degree check because we're checking the same as our Y speed, basically, then let's push ourselves to the left in the same way that we did the other stuff. While there is a place meeting of the current X position and our future Y position with the wall, then we can move our X out of there. Now, we've been using the subpixel variable, but in my base project, I have it just set to 1, just 1 pixel. And I want to say in this circumstance, using the subpixels was just a little bit too touchy for the slopes. Remember, like I said, they're basically staircases, not perfect actual sloped angles. And the 0.5 kind of caused a little bit of a stutter. So there's that, plus the smaller you use a subpixel number here, the more times this loop will run. So using a larger number is technically a little bit more efficient. And these slopes in general don't need to be quite as precise in the first place, because again, the nature of the fact that gravity is always acting on you. And so comparatively, these slopes you interact with a lot less. And the point is that it's just quite different than how precise you need to be when running into straight walls left or right or planting yourself on the ground. And like I said, I tested this stuff very extensively. And whenever you get into these really precise collisions where you want them to be really great and you're doing slopes and all these things, and eventually you're getting into stuff like moving platforms and all that, the little details are pretty important. So I would suggest you also make this one. And its collisions are just one of those things that they're touchy, at least in my experience in Gamemaker. They've been a little bit touchy again, you know, like having to add these little pads and things like that. Again, you could probably get away with not doing a lot of these little slight differences and tweaks, like, oh, I have to add or subtract an extra pixel from these checks, and this pixel check I'm doing 1 whole pixel, but a lot of times I'll do subpixels and things like that. Again, I've just balanced this to where I think that this is the best the system can be, especially considering once we get to the final product. So I'm still trying to make it as simple as possible. I did the absolute best I could to avoid any kind of like duct tape fixes or, you know, hot fixes for things and stuff like that. So I tried to just like build everything into it properly on Gamemaker's terms, right? In the way that it handles its collisions and things like that. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the series, there was actually a pretty decently big collision change that they made, I think within the last year. Maybe it's been a year at this point. I don't remember, but it was a big enough change to where like they had to add an option for legacy collision versions versus the new collision. So these things are always going to be touchy, and collisions are basically the most important thing in any kind of like, especially action-oriented game, like a platformer. So anyways, I don't mean to blow this out of proportion and make it sound like this is a huge deal or anything like that. I personally don't think it is. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because it's just me saying it's important to do as I show you in this series. So when I make a decision like using x minus equals 1 instead of minus equals the subpixel, it's because I've done my best to check both versions, and this one just seems better. So anyways, let's just move on, and we can now add the slide up right slope, and it's going to look very similar. Obviously, we only want to do that if we're not trying to move to the left. So if our move direction is not equal to -1, and there's not a place meeting, and again, we're just checking the opposite direction now. So it's going to be x plus the absolute value of our x speed plus an extra pixel for padding. We're checking where our y speed is supposed to be for a wall, and then we just do the opposite. So while there is a place meeting of our x and our y plus our y speed with a wall, then this time we're just going to add a pixel to our x position.
Great. Just interjecting really quick. One, yes, I accidentally typed x speed instead of y speed, and I deal with that in a second in the video, so you'll see what happens if we get that wrong. But the big thing here is there's also a very slight issue with what I talked about with using the move directions equaling -1 and +1. My logic still works, and it makes sense that we don't want to slide up left if we're holding to the right, and we don't want to slide up right if we're holding to the left, you know, our intent thing. All that, the logic is very sound there. just the way I implemented it has one tiny little issue here that also gets addressed and fixed in this video. I just wanted that to be a heads up just so you can be keeping it in mind. In fact, it's something I almost overlooked myself, and I just happened to find it while I was testing. So yeah, but again, my explanation of it is still the logic you should be going by. Just know that really the only time ultimately that we should probably be running that kind of code is if we're not inputting left or right at all. So even if you're moving to the left and trying to slide up left, you don't need to slide up left if you're already holding to the left, right? So eventually I just turned this to a if movedr equals 0 for both of these instead of doesn't equal +1 or doesn't equal -1. But anyways, we fix that in a minute. Just wanted you to be aware of it. Okay, back to it. Great. And then we want to add our normal collision, because again, right now our normal collision is only functioning if we're going downwards, and we want to add that back in if we're also going upwards, but neither of these are true. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a local variable above both of these checks. I'm going to call this var slope slide like this, and I'm going to set it equal to false. And basically what I'm going to do is if we slid up left, I'm going to set it equal to true, or if we slid up right, I'm going to set it equal to true. And that way I can do a normal Y collision as long as we didn't slope slide, right? So by default, it's false. And basically doing either of these tells us, okay, we did slide on a slope, so that means that we don't have a normal Y collision to do. But if we didn't do any sliding, that means this wall that we ran into while checking here, we can't get around it, so we have to do a normal collision. And that's basically going to be the same thing as this right here, which actually it's going to be the exact same thing as this right here, because I forgot to get rid of this in this check, our bonking code. We definitely don't need to have any bonking code for our downwards Y check because we won't bonk into anything. We're just going to land on the ground. So I'm going to get rid of that here and add it here. So again, this is just a precise collision check going upwards to the wall. And if we want to add our bonk back in, we can. But we'll only be bonking on walls that are at less than a 45-degree angle. So we would bonk on something like this because we don't really want to slide up this angle. So let's check both of those really quick. I'm going to scoot these down so I can do some checking. I'm just going to get one last look at that. I have my bonk off, but upwards check. Okay, looking pretty good. Let me check really quick and make sure I didn't screw this up while teaching you how to do this. All right, look at that. So cool. And if I'm holding to the right, then yeah, it doesn't force us to go to the left, but if I'm not holding to the right, then it does. Oh, I screwed up this one. What did I do? Let's see. Let's look at it. What did I screw up on this one? Oh, silly me. Here's what I screwed up. This is not supposed to be X speed right here. See how touchy this stuff is? This is supposed to be Y speed, right? It doesn't make any sense for us to check our X speed there. I probably added that in as a little note as I was typing it wrong, but this is a good opportunity to show you. I get a lot of comments, which I'm very sorry that I don't have the time to help out with individual comments most of the time. However, I do get a lot of comments that are like, I've done everything exactly how you did it and it doesn't work. It's very likely that your version of Gamemaker is not going to be different than mine, I promise. Like I said though, there's even points where they've done big collision changes, so sometimes it is going to be a little bit different. But changes like that are very, very uncommon for them to do. Like very uncommon, very few and far between. I doubt they'll be changing the collision system anytime soon again. If you're not used to looking for differences in code and you're not used to bug testing and problem solving when it comes to code, even in this just little space here, that can be a really hard thing just for your eyes to see. So just take it one character at a time. Eventually you'll get better at being able to spot these things quicker. It took me a minute to realize what was going on. So yeah, but and obviously why we did this. We're checking for the Y speed because that's the speed that we're moving upwards. So we need to check if we can also move that same speed to the right in this case. So yeah, so that should fix the problem. There we go. All fixed. And if I'm holding to the left, it won't do it. But yeah, so again, you may think this is weird. It is kind of weird that you can do things like this. Like I'm holding to the left, but then I'm letting go. That is a little bit odd. But yeah, so like I said, this is just this is a touchier, more kind of artistic part of these collisions, right? This just requires more decision making, which by the way, I forgot to test these. Let's test these sort of steeper slopes and make sure we don't go sliding up on these. No. You see, we go up like about a pixel if we're in the right pixel offset. Like I said, it's a staircase, so technically one of those might return. Yeah, like we might get pushed a single pixel, but otherwise, you see. And then because we have our downward slope, wow, so clean. Man,
Honestly, though, I'm happy with this system. It may not be the best, but for so long, like I'm sure many of you have, struggled with getting collisions that just do what you feel like they should be doing. You know what I'm saying? But you know, to that effect. My nemesis. Yeah, that fixes the problem. Okay. But my friends, that is slopes. And that is slopes from, as far as I'm aware, all reasonable, conceivable angles that you would want to deal with. And so yeah, what I was mentioning, what I was about to go into otherwise from that was this behavior may look a little bit weird to you, this like sliding up behavior that I settled on for my own needs or whatever, needs or wants. Because it can feel a little weird, and I completely understand that it can. So again, that's why I was saying, whoo, zoom. Yeah, look at this. Oh yeah, that's insane. Oh yeah. Okay. Pew. Hold on. Pew. All right. So what's actually happening there is for each of these individual tiny little single pixel ledges, not the 2 pixel ledges, but just the 1 pixel at the end, the code is pushing us to the left. So I just realized something that we can do to fix that, which is simple. All right, let's find our ceiling slopes again. What a frustratingly eventful this tutorial is becoming. Let's see. Around here. Yes, right here. So we're actually kind of seeing a flaw in my logic here with the intent basically being, oh, as long as I'm not trying to move to the right, slide me up left. As long as I'm not trying to move to the left, slide me up right. What probably needs to happen is as long as we are not intending to move either direction, which means, so if our movedir is 0, then that means we're not trying to do anything, because really, if we're trying to move to the left, we don't really need it to push us to the left in that case, right? So let's see. So that slides up there, and no more pew. Yeah, so that fixed that. Now, right now we're working with a character that has like digital movement, so set speeds and no momentum or anything like that. So our intent of just pressing a button works really well with it, because our intent with pressing the button normally matches up with what our X speed actually is at the time. But this code could also make a little bit more sense potentially by measuring if our, because again, for us right now, if our X speed was 0 right now, this would probably give us the exact same code, because our X speed is totally dependent on our moving direction. However, in like a momentum thing, you know, you could maybe do something like if your X speed was really low. So like if your absolute value of your X speed is less than like 0.4 or 0.5 or something, like a pretty low speed, then you can do the ceiling sliding. I find that it being based on the intent of the player's button press, something about that feels intuitive to me, but we can revisit that later in the sequel, one of the branch off series of this, whenever we talk about momentum more, stuff like Mario type physics. So that can always be something we revisit, but right now I think this just works pretty gosh darn good. Sorry about all the little hiccups in this, but again, I think they're good learning experiences for both of us, obviously. But yeah, so the thing about this, and like I said, this is a more artistic decision, this version of slopes, this upward ceiling thing. You could also just totally choose to not have it if you want. That's totally fine. What we have right here is like, it's got a little bit of quirks and it's a little bit strange. So I wouldn't blame you if you just chose not to. But again, I just wanted to illustrate the point that like when it comes to things like this with programming, game design is also tied in pretty close to this sort of stuff. And it also depends on how often do you expect your levels to have ceilings like this and these strange shapes and slopes where the player is actually going to be able to collide with them, right? If it's just every now and then, or if occasionally you do it at the corner of places for like aesthetic purposes, just to make ceilings look a little bit nicer, you know, there's an argument to be made that if you don't have them actually be that interactive that often, like where the player can actually run into them, then you can give them simpler behavior. You don't have to have the player be able to slide onto them or down them or anything like that. But there's also an argument to be made that the less you do it, if you still throw it in a couple times, what do you think the player would expect expect to happen, right? Do you think they would expect to have their momentum completely halted if they ran into this? Or do you think if they thought about jumping right up to it, it wouldn't react in any way? So, I don't know. And if you have a lot of ceilings like this, regardless of what you choose to do, the player is probably going to become very familiar with how your game works very quickly. So the predictability of this is going to be important. But yeah, like I said, it's up to you whether or not you want to include this, especially this last one. I think the moving forward, slope pushing you down, and obviously the going up and down slopes is pretty essential if you want to include slopes, but this one's optional. But I just wanted to show you how to do it, or how I tackled it anyways. And yeah, so totally up to you, my friend. Anyways, I am going to stop here. Good talk on slopes. Slopes are important. I imagine a lot of you specifically just came for this, and this might even be once you duck out of the series. So thank you, but stay for the rest, because semi-solid platforms are really cool, and so are moving platforms and moving semi-solid platforms. So anyways, see you around.
See, what did I tell you? It was eventful. Congratulations getting here. You got slopes. Yeah, baby. This is probably like the number one thing I bet most people were looking for, and it's probably the number one thing that is a really big hang up for a lot of people when it comes to leveling up, so to speak, with programming. Don't click off the video. No, but seriously, I remember they had me stumped for a really long time. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this series, I learned this stuff, basically this stuff, from Sean Spalding. Again, great YouTube channel. Watch it if you haven't before. It's wonderful. But yeah, with this one, I wanted to go pretty far with it. We have all the different sort of scenarios for the slopes, like the ceiling slopes, and what happens if you jump into a steep one and stuff like that. So I really wanted to cover all that stuff. And it can kind of start opening your brain to solving other potential issues in programming, right? And that being said, like I mentioned, the next one has some good stuff in it, but the next one is like really one where you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to be like, oh, if I can do this, then that means I can probably do this with all these other things I'm thinking of. So yeah, absolutely watch the rest of the series, especially the next one. But yeah, congratulations. You're here and you've done it. You got to the end of the video and you got slopes in your game. That's a huge milestone. So I'm proud of you. You can look at my games and my Patreon in the description if you feel like it. But right now, just take some time to be proud of yourself. And take that time while I give some shout outs to my star gamers from my Patreon: Nick Sionic, Null, Caden Brightwell, Joseph Sandlin, Midnight, Eogio, Christian Donovan, Jazzy, DT, Richard DeLuca, Arya Sparks, Maya, Roble, Crazy Poo Chucker, Harrison, Joshua, Takuni, Ruben Leavel, Moody, Mikel Alexander, David Rivas, NerdBoutique.com, Carlos Acosta, John Brown, Frog Salt, Joshua Hurry, Marco Romo, Howie, Sam Live, Andreas Premel, Bill Lottie, AOAO, Amar Ali, Nick Lee, Matthew Carr, C, Mancat, Patrick, Yaskrit Brar, Dean Blackborough, Micah Smith, Matt Lumens, Jonah Newman, Finn Leaville, and BB Samurai. Awesome work, everybody, and I better see you in the next one.